if you guys are right and there is a problematic breakdown when people have lost sight of the fact that perhaps because there's two paths. They're listening to an interview like that because the establishment has lied so many times that when somebody says, hey, listen to me, I've been shut down erroneously, you need to hear these things and they're going to help us. Maybe that really is true. Or maybe it's, we've now just given up pursuing quote unquote truth because we have no idea how to find it, nor do we know why we care about it.
Well, may I add a couple of pieces there? First, I don't know that that's true. I don't think we've lost that. I think there's a few things going on. First of all, anything that involves a camera and a microphone will naturally over-prioritize charisma. So one of the things that happens with any kind of mass communication is this is why truth matters, because actually being interested in what's true is the only way I think that we are able to overcome very faulty heuristics that human beings have evolved with. And I'm not saying they're faulty for the ancestral environment 50,000 years ago, but they are faulty in the modern world, right? And our cognitive biases will naturally lead us away, I think, from truth, because that is a much harder path. In the same way that the reason it takes discipline to go to the gym and work out and lose weight is that it's much easier when you're surrounded by abundance to just shove food in your mouth and not do anything, right? It's much more comforting. It's much easier to do. So I think that being interested in what's ultimately true is the way that we can overcome our inclination to believe things that charismatic people tell us, to believe things that match what we already believe, to believe, I mean, that is essentially, to some extent, the nature of the scientific method, right? Is testing as a reality as opposed to going, well, this seems right, or I believe this, or whatever. So I think that ultimately the reason I'm really interested in it is I think that it's the only way to overcome my own predisposition to believe things about the world that make me feel good, that are not, as you say, predictive and therefore useful. And unless you operate in the world from that perspective, unless that's what you're optimizing for, your brain is going to take you off on a loop. And now we live in a world where every whim of yours is catered to. And if your whim is to be entertained, if your whim is to hear a conspiracy, and I have to say, I don't know why, and I'm actually really interested in investigating and finding out. I have found that I think in the US, those kind of ideas about how the world is and who runs it and all of that seem to have a way broader appeal than they do in the UK where I live. I don't know why that is. It could be the flip side of the beautiful American idea that, I remember America is a nation of believers, and I don't mean necessarily religiously. I just mean, the idea that you can tame a continent in a couple of centuries and create this incredible country, which is the most powerful and, in my opinion, the greatest society in the history of the world, that's an act of faith in and of itself. And maybe the trade-off is that, Americans are very good at believing lots of different things, and this is one of them. So that's maybe why really being interested in is what I'm tempted to believe an accurate reflection of reality is the antidote to going off the rails on that front. And I think that's why I am so interested in it. It's really to guard against my own cognitive biases that I think we all have.
Well, let me give you an example of just how distorted I think our current moment is, because I find it surprising. So you take the war in Gaza, right, and we're now on the tail of all of these college protests we've witnessed in our finest institutions. Apparently an endless number of people expressing sympathy for the Palestinians and even sympathy for Hamas, and which is just officially a genocidal death cult. I mean, described itself as a genocidal death cult, and they seem, everything to my eye morally seems upside down. I mean, they can't distinguish the difference between people who use human shields versus people who are deterred by the use of human shields. They can't distinguish people who intentionally burn families alive from people who inadvertently kill innocent people, trying to kill the people who burn families alive intentionally. So there's just so many asymmetries here. But what's amazing is you have these protests on college campuses effectively silencing even some of the most powerful people in our society. I mean, even just celebrities who you'd think would be totally unconcerned to express their opinion. They're being silenced. They understand that there's a difference between Hamas and the IDF. They won't say anything in support of Israel because it's just too toxic in Hollywood or among Fortune 500 corporations. They're so worried about being boycotted and public backlash, especially on social media, and yet on the other side, there are people signing. The celebrities are signing letters in support of the Palestinians, and they're not at all concerned to be mistaken for people who support Hamas or even outright anti-Semitic. So there's that asymmetry of public opinion, and yet there was just yesterday a Harvard-Harris poll that revealed that 75% of Americans are all in for Israel. They think Israel should just rout out Hamas tomorrow in Rafah, right? I mean, everyone's been debating whether the IDF should go into Rafah, and this is the absolutely tortured debate. 75% of Americans say go into Rafah and kill Hamas, right? That's where public sentiment actually is. And yet we have built a machine, right, where even the most powerful people in our society are terrified of the 25%. They're busily offending either by their silence or by their support for Hamas, effectively 75% of America, and they don't even know it because everything is so distorted. The whole information landscape is so distorted, based on the capture of certain elite institutions by some very confused people on the left, and what we've done on social media. I mean, everyone's just looking at X thinking, oh my God, everyone supports, everyone thinks Israel is guilty of genocide. I should keep my head down here. I know Israel is not guilty of genocide, if the word means anything, but this is just too dangerous. And yet, in terms of the actual public sentiment of the people who could buy the tickets to your next film, it's completely reversed in reality.
And I think one of the reasons that is, there are obviously lots of reasons, but one of the reasons is in the social media age, the cognitive bias of, oh my God, I am seeing horror on my screen, therefore this is wrong, right, automatically, is very hard to overcome. And it's very difficult to argue against that when you're seeing, look, I'm a father. When you see dead babies being pulled out of rubble by their parents, like there's no human being alive, unless they're a psychopath, that doesn't go, oh my God, this is awful. And this should stop immediately, right? But does that really reflect the nature of reality? No, but we also have a significant portion of the population that cannot think past their emotions. But that notwithstanding, 75% of Americans think they should go into Rafah. I think your point is well taken. I wasn't disputing that at all. And I think your point about the fact that there are different conversations happening in different places, I think is absolutely right. My point is, I think one of the reasons for that is 75% of Americans are not sitting and looking at their phone every day for 8 hours, watching children being blown apart and whatever. But those people who are interested in what's going on and are looking into it, they are not able to think past, I have seen one image. Yeah,
dead babies. Yeah.
And dead babies are bad. I think we can all say that, right? I mean, it's uncontroversial. But being confronted with the nature of war and thinking that it's horrible, I think is a useful thing in terms of really being reluctant to get into wars unless it's absolutely necessary. On the other hand, you have to be able to see past your emotional, visceral reaction in some situations and say, why is this war happening? What is the objective of this war? Who is responsible for this baby being pulled out of rubble? Who is it? Is it the people who are going in to kill terrorists? Or is it the terrorists who are using the baby as a human shield?
How do you run that moral math? How do you get everyone to run the same moral math?
I don't think you can. I don't think look, this sounds elitist and snobby. I don't think everyone's capable of it. And we see evidence of that every day. A lot of people like to operate solely by emoting. and we now have tools that encourage them to do so.
Well, people can get better at consuming video, right? I mean, we know we're bad at this, and we should spell out why people are bad at this. So you see a video of some guy being beaten senseless by a crowd, right? And it starts in the middle of the emergency. He's getting, he's already down, and he's getting punched and kicked by 5 people. He certainly looks like the victim, right? But you have to understand that you don't know what happened just before the clip started, right? You don't know. So I've seen video like that where I assumed, okay, this is an atrocity. This guy's obviously the victim, and yet I find out that this guy just stabbed someone, and he's being subdued by a bunch of unarmed, terrified people, right? Right. So it was exactly backwards, right? And so we know that even when things seem absolutely obvious based on the clip, they could be exactly the opposite of what you think. And so it is with scenes from Gaza. I mean, this was, I remember Rogan at one point was analyzing, I forget who he was talking to, but he had some clip of, 5 guys being bombed in Gaza as though this were proof of war crimes. And these were obviously unarmed, young men, and who were just walking. They seemed to be guilty of nothing other than walking, and they got hit by, looked like a drone, or it was not clear, but they were killed, and yet we have no idea what happened before that clip started, right? So we don't know whether they just planted an IED and it was absolutely obvious that they were combatants and it was totally valid within the rules of war to target them. You just don't know, right? So we have to become better consumers of our own emotional reactivity in response to admittedly disturbing imagery, whatever the actual accurate interpretation.
Do you have a method for that?
Well, it's just to continually price in my uncertainty about those kinds of variables, but the truth is, honestly, my method has been to spend much less time on social media. I deleted my Twitter account. So now when I look at X, it's just because someone has driven me there, like, you have to see this. And then occasionally I'll look at my feed. So I have a feed on X that's not following anyone, and on which I have basically clicked nothing apart from occasionally getting sent a video that has brought me there, or a post that's brought me there. And I am amazed at what a digital sewer it is in terms of what it is trying. I mean, the algorithm seems to just want me to be terrified of the world and probably racist in at least 2 directions, right? It wants to show me black people beating up white people and white people beating up black people, in classrooms all over America. Like, how much this happens, who knows? But or a security cam video of just somebody being horribly murdered for whatever reason, or just accident. I mean, it's just, and then obviously there's the occasional cute cat video, but it's like we have built there's
white cats beating up black cats and vice versa.
That'll happen. But I mean, we've created a psychological experiment and enrolled everybody.
Yeah.
And it's analogous to watching local news all the time. I mean, I learned 30 years ago that, or longer, that I didn't want to spend much time watching local news because there's always just some depressing car chase, or somebody was raped. It's like, I don't need to know this. It's not actually going to change what I do, and it's just this tawdry regurgitation of human misery. And there's always at least no matter how small the locality, maybe certainly in any big city is big enough to always have some horror that can be broadcast into your brain about which you're going to do absolutely nothing. And it doesn't make sense for you to even be cognizant of it, and yet it's there to depress you. And social media has become this on a global stage. And it's just, I mean, again, it's not that I want people to be oblivious to what's happening in the world. I mean, I do want to know, I want to have a map that fits the territory. I want to know what the rates of violent crime actually are, et cetera. But those data are communicated very differently, and they often don't track the imagery that we all get in our heads just by looking at a scroll, right? I mean, you see what this is what's so distorting about these videos. I mean, most people on the left, certainly anyone left of center in America, thinks very likely that we have an epidemic of lethal police violence against young black men, right? That if you it's totally rational if you're a black parent to have the talk with your young black son. If he goes out there, he's much more likely to get killed by the cops than his white friends, and this is just an intolerable legacy of racism in America. As far as the stats go, the best understanding of what the dynamics of actual police violence and the 1,000 people every year thereabouts who get killed by the cops, we know that's bullshit, right? It's just not what's happening. The likelihood that you're going to get killed once you come into contact with the cops, if you're black, is not higher than if you're white, right? But everyone's seen 12 videos that makes it seem like they're these lunatic cops performing lynchings, and they haven't seen the analogous and in fact more numerous cases where unarmed white people have been killed by cops, once again disgracefully, in many cases, but the actual stats are just show you how infrequent it is that an unarmed person of any color gets killed by the cops in America. It's just not happening very often. I mean, it's around, it's maybe 40 people a year, a majority of whom are not black, and of the 1,000, and among those unarmed people who get killed by cops, most of them are not peacefully. Most of them are trying to kill the cops. They're wrestling with the cops. They're trying to get the gun out of the cops' hands. It's not like the cops are routinely killing nonviolent people in America, and yet we have a kind of pornography of racial grievance that is continually advertising a different story to us. And again, so given the dynamics of social media, that is always going to prevail. I mean, that's just like because of the algorithmic incentive to spread the outrage.
Other than, Sam, the pursuit of truth, which I think the point you were just making is actually a very good example of where the genuine pursuit of truth and context. In Russia, there's a Russian saying, everything is understood in comparison, right? And what you're talking about is a very good example of where actually finding out what the data is not only is useful, but it actually can change your life, especially if you're a young black man, because you are then less likely to go into that police interaction with the expectation that you will be killed, which means you're going to act differently, which means that you're probably less likely to be killed as a result, right? Knowing that context, knowing that what the statistics are, it is going to inform you to behave in a different way. And this is what I was going to make. I'm actually really reluctant to get involved in the Gaza conversation beyond some basic obvious things, just because I don't know enough about it. But I think one of the critical things in analyzing this conversation, like many others, is the importance of history. And that's the context in which human beings operate in, the history of human beings. Thomas Sowell, who I pretty much worship at this point, he's written extensively about the idea that the best way to understand what people are likely to do in the future is to look at what they've done in the past. And you can slice that 100 different ways. If you find clay tablets from ancient Egypt, they're going to be likely basically discussing the same things that human beings discuss now. My son doesn't... a mother complaining about her son not being around and all this other human stuff. So when we're looking at the conflict in Gaza, I only bring it up because we've been talking about it. I've been trying to say to people, well, if we're going to talk about this seriously, let's look at previous situations in which conflicts of this nature have broken out, for one reason or another. And how has that happened? People give the example of Fallujah, and I think Coleman Hughes actually did a very good job with Joe talking about this on his podcast. But beyond that, whether it's the Japan at the end of World War II, whether it's what happened in Germany at the end of World War II, whether it's previous situations in which a group of people have attacked another people and then lost that fight. How does that normally go? How have we treated this in history? That gives you a context that is very useful for offsetting the visceral experience you have when you're confronted with the reality of war, which is horrific. So in that sense, as you know, my big concern about the direction of the West is that we are becoming divorced from our history on so many different ways, and we are being sold a bunch of lies about how we got here and who we are. And that's just one tiny sliver of that, one tiny sliver. So the fact that the overwhelming majority of people in our societies, and I include to some extent myself in this, are either uneducated or miseducated about history, is a lot of the reason we are where we are, because that context gives you the ability to be the guy who doesn't get killed by the cops, effectively, right? That context, that truth is how you know that you need to act in a particular way to get the best possible outcome in that situation. Which is why I'm just always talking about the need to teach kids history and contextualize. This is one of the things I personally was very fortunate to get from what was actually a reasonably good Soviet education system, and also my parents, you know.